इसराइल हमास जंग और इस बीच बेगुनाह मासूम फिलिस्तीनियों पर जारी कत्लेआम को 7 नवंबर को पूरा 1 महीना गुजर चुका है और मासूम बच्चों, जवां मर्दों, खवातीन और बुजुर्गों की मौत का सिलसिला जारी है। कभी हमास के नाम पर अस्पताल और कभी रेफ्यूजी कैंप्स पर बमबारी की बरसात अभी थमी नहीं है और इसराइल की प्यास अनकरीब बुझती नजर नहीं आ रही। इस सब के बीच यूनाइटेड नेशंस के सेक्रेटरी जनरल एंटोनियो गुटरेस ने एक बार फिर न सिर्फ आलमी बिरादरी बल्कि इसराइल से भी सीधे तौर पर कहा कि मासूम बच्चों के कब्रिस्तान बन चुके गाजा में हर गुजरते लम्हे के साथ सीजफायर की जरूरत बढ़ रही है, बल्कि फौरन से पेशतर सीजफायर हो ही जाना चाहिए। इतना ही नहीं, गुटरेस ने साफ किया कि पिछली 3 दहाइयों में इतनी तादाद में कभी सहाफियों का कत्लेआम नहीं हुआ जितना गाजा में सिर्फ इसराइल के हमलों के दौरान हुआ है।
The nightmare in Gaza is more than a humanitarian crisis. It is a crisis of humanity. The intensifying conflict is shaking the world, rattling the region, and most tragically, destroying so many innocent lives. Ground operations by the Israel Defense Forces and continued bombardment are hitting civilians, hospitals, refugee camps, mosques, churches, and UN facilities, including shelters. No one is safe. At the same time, Hamas and other militants use civilians as human shields and continue to launch rockets indiscriminately towards Israel. I reiterate my utter condemnation of the abhorrent acts of terror perpetrated by Hamas on 7 October and repeat my call for the immediate, unconditional and safe release of hostages held in Gaza. Nothing can justify the deliberate torture, killing, injuring and kidnapping of civilians. The protection of civilians must be paramount. I'm deeply concerned about clear violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing. Let me be clear. No party to an armed conflict is above international humanitarian law. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children. Hundreds of girls and boys are reportedly being killed or injured every day. More journalists have reportedly been killed over a 4-week period than in any conflict in at least 3 decades. More United Nations aid workers have been killed than in any comparable period in the history of our organization. I salute all those who continue their life-saving work despite the overwhelming challenges and risks. And the unfolding catastrophe makes the need for a humanitarian ceasefire more urgent with every passing hour. The parties to the conflict, and indeed the international community, face an immediate and fundamental responsibility to stop the inhuman collective suffering and dramatically expand humanitarian aid to Gaza.
अब तक 36 सहाफी मारे जा चुके हैं और हस्ब दस्तूर मगरूर इसराइल गुटरेस पर ही आग बबूला हो उठा और अपनी आदत के मुताबिक गुटरेस पर जमकर जहर उगला। यूएन में इसराइल के एम्बेसडर ने ट्वीट किया कि गुटरेस को इस्तीफा दे देना चाहिए क्योंकि उनको जब जुनूब इसराइल में जो हमास ने 7 अक्टूबर को किया वो इजरायली बच्चों का कब्रिस्तान क्यों नहीं दिखा। साथ ही वो हमास जैसी टेररिस्ट तंजीम का मुकाबला कानून के दायरे में काम करने वाली जमहूरियत से कैसे कर सकते हैं। इतना ही नहीं, इसराइल के फॉरेन मिनिस्टर एली कोहन ने कहा कि इन हालात के लिए अगर कोई जिम्मेदार है तो सिर्फ हमास, ना कि इसराइल।
Council members, when my grandfather Chaim and his children were sent to Auschwitz, the world stayed silent. When his babies were sent to the gas chambers, the world stayed silent. When their bodies were burned along millions of other Jewish children, not only Jewish, the world was silent. Today, after innocent Jewish babies were burned alive, this council is still silent. Some member states have learned nothing in the past 80 years. Some of you have forgotten why this body was established. So I will remind you, from this day on, each time you look at me, you will remember what staying silent in the face of evil means. Just like my grandparents and the grandparents of millions of Jews, from now on, my team and I will wear yellow stars. We will wear this star until you condemn the atrocities of Hamas and demand the immediate release of our hostages. We walk with a yellow star as a symbol of pride, a reminder that we swore to fight back, to defend ourselves. Never again is now. Council members, in the face of the UN's silence, our enemies have become emboldened. They have seen the UN General Assembly applauding efforts to prevent the Jews from defending ourselves. They heard the Secretary General portray understanding for the Nazi slaughter.
गुटरेस ने गाजा के लोगों के लिए बुनियादी जरूरियात के लिए ह्यूमन एड में इजाफे की भी सिफारिश की, जिस पर भी इजराइल को परेशानी है। उनका कहना है कि जो भी सामान रफा बॉर्डर के जरिए जाएगा उसमें पेट्रोल नहीं होना चाहिए। एक बार फिर गुटरेस ने पूरी पाकीज़गी बरतते हुए अपनी जिम्मेदारी को निभाया और कहा कि बिना पेट्रोल के नौज़ादा बच्चे जो इनक्यूबेटर्स में हैं या फिर वो बीमार जिनकी सांसें सिर्फ लाइफ सपोर्ट सिस्टम पर ही चल रही हैं, क्या हमको उनकी जान की परवाह नहीं करनी चाहिए? लिहाजा पेट्रोल की जरूरत भी पूरी होनी चाहिए।
Today, the United Nations and our partners are launching a $1.2 billion humanitarian appeal to help 2.7 million people. That's the entire population of the Gaza Strip and 500,000 Palestinians in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Some life-saving aid is getting into Gaza from Egypt through the Rafah crossing. But the trickle of assistance does not meet the ocean of need. And let's be clear, the Rafah crossing alone does not have the capacity to process 8 trucks at the scale required. Just over 400 trucks have crossed into Gaza over the past 2 weeks, compared with 500 a day before the conflict. And crucially, this does not include fuel. Without fuel, newborn babies in incubators and patients on life support will die. Water cannot be pumped or purified. Raw sewage could soon start gushing onto the streets, further spreading disease. Trucks loaded with critical relief will be stranded. The way forward is clear. A humanitarian ceasefire now. All parties respecting all their obligations under international humanitarian law now. This means the unconditional release of the hostages in Gaza now. The protection of civilians, hospitals, UN facilities, shelters and schools now. More food, more water, more medicine, and of course fuel entering Gaza safely, swiftly, and at the scale needed now.